Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to be showing you one of my projects, actually the last project that I ever did at university, and this was my thesis project. And so I just want to give a few words of disclaimer here, but don't expect to see a realistic project. I know a lot of people for their thesis make some sort of case study that they can include in their portfolio, some sort of realistic project. I didn't do that, and I was lucky too. I didn't think I was lucky back then, but I was lucky to be in a studio where my professor allowed us to pick the topic. He allowed us to pick the project. It could be anything. It could be real. It could be fake. It could be sci-fi. It could be anything you wanted. And so at the time, I didn't think I was lucky because when a professor gives you that option, you don't know what to do. Nothing feels good enough. Every time you pick something, you feel like, man, but what if I do this instead? And that's exactly what happened. So that's basically the first thing that I want to say. And then the second thing that I want to say is that this that you're about to see is me stepping out of my comfort zone for the first time. I used to really not enjoy crazy projects. I used to like to design things that were more, I guess, realistic. I don't like that word too much, but I guess realistic would be an okay word to use here. I like to make projects based on reality with only a hint of imagination. And so my professor really pushed me to step out of my boundary, out of my comfort zone, and try a lot of new things here. So let's just get into this right here. So what you're looking at here is at the beginning of the project. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. But at the time, Windows Mixed Reality and the Oculus Rift and all this cool virtual reality, augmented reality stuff was coming out. And so I was really inspired by all that stuff. And I really imagine a world where that type of technology evolved. And so what I wanted to create was some sort of virtual reality park. And I presented this to my professor, and he thought it was cool at the time. And the idea would be that it would be some sort of outdoor park where people would just come and look at virtual reality stuff. So the idea was that these are panels, right? These are panels that have images that overlay on reality. So it's not virtual reality, it's augmented reality. And one of my professors, or my professor at the time, asked me a question, and he was like, well, what are you going to display here? And I had no idea. I had imagined that this would be a place where people would just come for entertainment. This right here is another shot showing you another area of this virtual reality park. So the idea was that this park would grow throughout the city. It wasn't in a specific location. It would kind of just like grow all around and spread out. And it would be kind of like little pop-ups of virtual reality and augmented reality. And that's pretty much it. That's what I had started with. And this actually is not the first starting point, but I won't get into what came before this because it's not going to make any sense at all. And so there was this back and forth between me and my professor, and he kept on asking, but what do you want out of this? Like, what do you want? And I had no idea. I was like, I don't know. I just want something cool. He's like, that's not good enough. It's not good enough to do just something cool. There has to be something greater. And I just was lost. That's it. I didn't know what else to do. And so before I continue the story, I want to mention one other thing. And that is that around a lot of the things that I'm going to be showing you, I can't tell you why I did it, all of it, because in architecture school, there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of thinking, conversations that are impossible to record. And I'm not able to remember every specific detail. And I can't tell you, well, why did I lay these panels this way or anything? And that's going to make more sense in just a few minutes as I move on through. You're probably going to be curious, and you can feel free to reach me out in the comments or reach out to me in the comments and ask me why I did what I did. And I'll try to answer. But most of the stuff, if I leave things out, it's because I have no idea what happened. And so as I say this, let's move on to the next picture, which is this. And now it's where it starts to get crazy. So put on your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen. So me and my professor were having these conversations. A few friends of mine were having these conversations about my project. And my professor keeps urging me to step out of my comfort zone. And I don't know what that means. I have no idea. I just didn't know. And he says, just sketch whatever comes to mind. So I mentioned that at the beginning of my project, I had this idea that this project would kind of grow throughout the city. And I never knew why I wanted that, but I just had that gut instinct. And so I pretty much start to imagine this theme park, right? This virtual reality theme park, not as a form of entertainment or of a park, but actually something more useful, right? And so I imagine a world where we have robotic arms, as you can see here in my sketch, and they're building. And what are they building exactly? Well, they're building this here. And why are they doing that? Well, I wasn't 100% sure at the time, But my professor did tell me to just sketch whatever I had in mind. But as I start to dig deeper into my mind and what I'm thinking, I start to imagine that this tool, augmented reality and virtual reality, could be used to educate people in the future. Because one of our problems, right, is that we have a lot of audio and video from the past, but those are only glimpses into past life, right? We can only experience the past through whatever images we have and whatever audio we have, and that's pretty much it. And luckily, as technology gets better, now we're able to do things like this, a YouTube video, and I'm able to record more of my thoughts, and I have podcasts to listen to and all that. But it just didn't feel good enough. So I felt that maybe by using virtual reality and augmented reality, we can create a way to educate the future, right? So we can pretty much record 24/7 all our daily activities, like a 360 camera basically, and we start feeding that into some sort of database. And we create this park where people can go to in the future, and they can actually live how we lived by looking at it, by observing, using virtual reality. And so I imagine that as technology gets better, we wouldn't really need humans to fix this thing for us. We would depend on robots to continue the job through algorithms or whatnot, to continue basically the idea of continuing to repair this project as it begins to break, only because if for whatever reason we don't exist anymore as humans, these robots could somehow exist and continue to build this project. And so if some sort of other civilization in the future finds us, the same way that we found ancient civilizations and we don't totally understand them, those civilizations can start to see how we lived, right? And so that's what I'm thinking here. I'm thinking of like it's some sort of parametric architecture that's not made by humans, but it starts off as made by human, but then as the robots begin to repair and build, they do it their own way using whatever materials they could find. And that's why we start getting these weird, almost like growth type architecture. And it would be really related to like some sort of organic architecture. And so that's why I'm not really concerned with if it looks pretty or not. It's mostly the idea of if it's functional, and what would a robot building look like if its sole purpose was to just fix rather than build aesthetically. Anyway, I hope that that you're not getting bored by all this. If you are, you can just end the video. But my idea is that I give you more information rather than not enough information. So I'm just trying to tell you everything that I can remember from this project. And this was from 2 years ago, so there's a lot of blanks that I have. So again, that's just me trying to show you, what would this look like in there? And this is very diagrammatic. So here we have the robots, they're repairing the bottom of this structure. And here we have these platforms. And that's not a person to scale. That's actually the panels of virtual reality. So now this is virtual reality, not mixed reality. It's actual virtual reality. And you can see as in different locations throughout the projects, there's different things going on. And the idea would be that future civilizations could start to see us basically in virtual reality. If you're wondering what I used to make these structures, well, this was Rhino and Grasshopper. So I had never used Grasshopper before, so I was kind of like experimenting with Grasshopper to simulate some sort of growth parametric architecture. And now you can see how this starts to grow throughout the city. So I just want to interject here and say, when you work on a project like this, it begins to piss people off. Why? People they feel comfortable talking about what they know. So when you talk about something that they don't know, then people start to get really antsy and uncomfortable, and they start to feel hate toward your project. And why am I saying that? Well, because a lot of my friends, they didn't understand this type of stuff. And to be fair, I didn't understand this when people would show it to me before I started doing this. And so once I started doing this, it was like unleashing my creativity. So even though this thesis project, you may or may not like it, I want to add that doing something like this, where you just tap into your creativity and explore it and have a conversation with your creativity, it's really rewarding. That's all I'll say. That's all I'll say on that. So back to the story. My professor looks at this. He's like, you're headed in the right direction. I'm super confused. I don't know exactly what's going on here. There's something I like about it. There's something that I don't like about it. Try to find out what that is. And professors are infamous for doing this. They tell you, I like this, I don't like this, fix it. And you're like, fix what? I like it. And they're like, yeah, but I don't, so fix it. And it never makes any sense. So As you can imagine, I was kind of devastated because I thought I was headed in the right direction, and he kind of said I was, but it didn't feel like that after a few crits. So I start to look and gather some information online. Again, I kind of reset myself. So I got to this point through sketching, right? And I'm like, well, how can I get to the next level? Let's try some research. So I find these YouTube videos, and I'll try to find them again, and I'll link them in my description if I can. And anything that I mention in this video that references to something else, I'll try to link it in the description. If it's not there, it's because I couldn't find it. But if it's there, I hope you enjoy that too. So as I'm doing all this, right, and I can't tell you the specific order of events of how it happened, but as all this is unfolding, I'm doing a lot of research online, finding out about civilizations and climate change, and I find these videos and these charts talking about how the world, the climate of the world has its peaks and valleys, right? So it gets really hot and it gets really cold, and we find that out through core studies. So what they do is they dig these giant cores out of the ground and they pull them out, and they're able to study the layers of the ice, right? And apparently they do this in Greenland, and they're able to tell you how hot or how cold it was at a certain point in time. And so in this chart, and this is just a screenshot from a YouTube video, you can see that these are the years. So 2179, 2007, 1835, blah, blah, blah. It goes all the way back to for some reason 1943, and I don't know if that's arbitrary or not, but what it's kind of pointing out here is that it's letting you know that in points of very hot earth temperatures, the strongest civilizations have grown. And in this next picture, in points of very low temperature, we've had things like the Dark Ages, right, or the Greece Dark Ages, where civilizations begin to die. So I start to dig deeper into this, and I start to find out that basically the hotter it is, the better it is for us, and the colder it is, the worse it is for us. And I'm not saying that I agree or disagree. I'm just letting you know what I found online. And so I start looking into this. There was one podcast, Joe Rogan with Randall Carson. Okay, and I'm gonna link that one for sure. There's 2 episodes, but the first one was so mind-blowing. He talks about all the civilizations and how they've died. And I don't remember the exact details, but as I'm listening to all this, I start imagining, the oldest civilization that we know of is 4,000, 5,000 years of civilization, right? Which I believe it's the Sumerians. Those were the first ones that we know about, right? And before that, it was just nomadic humans, right? And the oldest human that we ever found was 200,000 years ago. So I'm thinking, okay, how many times does 2,000 years fit into 200,000 years? So as I'm studying all this stuff, I start imagining, could it be that there have been civilizations before as smart as us, but for some reason they've died over and over and over and over again? That there have been civilizations probably even smarter than us, maybe 400,000 years ago on Earth? And some of you might cringe and might be like, that's impossible. Science is against that. Hey, man, I was just having fun with these thoughts. And out of all this information, I just come up with this right here. Not that. And so I become to now make these structures a little bit more sophisticated, and it's still the same idea. Here we are inside these structures that they look like they're transparent, but they're not. This is just some sort of mixed reality, augmented reality film that goes around these structures, and people from future civilizations start to visit. And that's because I started to imagine that what if one day our civilization disappears, but humanity doesn't cease to exist somehow, our civilization just dies out, and let's say 10,000 years from now, they begin to discover our remains, future civilizations. And so my idea is, how can we create some sort of capsule where we can retain the essence of our civilization, and the essence being information of our civilization. So if future civilizations discover us on Earth and we're not here anymore to explain ourselves, this project will do the best that it can. And then I come up with this, and this is closer to my final already. So now I'm just going to go through my actual project. And the name of this project is called Transcendence. Again, I can't remember exactly why I chose that name, but this is transcendence. And so what transcendence is, if I was to explain it in a nutshell, is it's a time capsule. It's a very sophisticated technological time capsule that houses the integrity of who we are in the form of information that's displayed in augmented reality, in virtual reality, and in mixed reality, and in the form of actual physical artifacts. And I hope that's not too confusing for you. But again, you can reach out to me and I could explain it to you. This is the model that I had made. And the reason that I made it to look like this is because one of the requirements for my thesis was to make an actual model of your project. And so my project was going to be like almost impossible to make, and I didn't want to 3D print it because one, I needed to 3D print, you need a 3D version of your model, and I did have a 3D version, but it wasn't made to be 3D printed, so it was going to fail. And if I would have tried to remake that model, it was going to take me too long, and I was running against the clock anyway, already as it is. So I started thinking of how I could possibly make a model that would require less time than 3D printing it or laser cutting it. And so I came up with this idea. And the way that I did this was I grabbed my Rhino model, which I had a full 3D Rhino model. And again, it wasn't optimized for 3D printing, but I cut a bunch of sections through it. I think it was one every 50 feet or one every 10 feet or something. I don't remember. And I grabbed each of those and I laser cut those sections onto pieces of plexiglass. Now, when I did this model, I was toward the end of the semester. So all the labs, all the 3D printing and laser cutting labs at school were pretty much booked from a month in advance. So I didn't have time to get this done there at school. So I had to pay a company to do this model for me. And I think I paid over $200 for this model that you're looking at here. But what I did was that I had that company etch with a laser cutter all these individual sections on different pieces of plexiglass. And then I also designed the base in, I think it was AutoCAD, and I had that laser cut as well so that the plexiglass could fit into each slot. And then the idea was that when all those little plexiglass sections were put together, it would create the illusion of a three-dimensional model. So it's an illusion model. It's not a physical three-dimensional model. And then I put that blue light in the base, and that was just to add a cool effect. And guess what? It worked. My professor was fine with that. He didn't mind the fact that I didn't have a real physical 3D model. He was okay with the fact that I made this illusion type model. And so the idea would be that the city up here would be dead, right? In this world, there would be no more humans. We're all gone. And I know I show some human scale figures there, but the idea would be that for some reason, for some cataclysmic event happens, and we're all gone, but this thing is still working, and robots are fixing it somehow, right? And so I begin to imagine this world, and then I imagine a future civilization discovering us, discovering this. And so how it would work is that there's this central core, and the central core has a spiral downward ramp that you can use to walk, but it also has this platform that I'll show you in another image that has like some sort of drones at the bottom that levitate up and down through it. So the idea would be that you can access it through the drone, but if for some reason it stops working, then you can actually access it using this ramp. And then there's two main levels to this. Level 1 is the human experience. So when the future civilization discovers this project, they'd go down this core and then into here. And you'll notice these black gaps. And there's a few of them. There's one here, one here, one there, one there. The idea would be like if there's ever flooding on Earth, these doors would just close and stop the flooding from accessing further spaces and give time to the robots that live within here to fix all the damage that's done by the flooding. So there's one of those chambers here, and you'll see that the person from the future civilization will walk into here. And then in these spaces, right, there are some sort of goggles. And I didn't get into designing that. I didn't have the time to, hash out every single detail of this project, unfortunately. I wish I could have. But there's some sort of technology, like let's say glasses, that allows them to put them on and see things within this project. So now they can start to see augmented reality, and now the project starts to communicate with the person. So once they put these glasses on, they start seeing like a history of Earth and who was here and whatnot. And that's what this here is for. It's some sort of introduction. So think of like a video, and the person watches like some sort of video in augmented reality form, and they start to find out, okay, what is going on here, right? Then as they continue on through, they access this space right here, and this space is really underdeveloped in this section. But what this space here is where there's going to be physical artifacts in these capsules. So beside the virtual reality, the mixed reality, let's call it from now on. So beside the mixed reality, there's also going to be physical artifacts that we would bury in this time capsule so that these future civilizations can access them. And it's up to them what they want to do with it. They can either break them and study them, or they can just leave them how they are. You know, it's completely up to them. Hopefully this future civilization is smarter than we are at this point, at the point that they discover this. I also want to mention that beside Randall Carson, someone that really inspired me was Lebbeus Woods. If you're not familiar with him, I was in Design 1, but I always ignored his work because I was like, oh man, that's too crazy for me. But if you have the time, there's this YouTube video that he talks about his projects, and he really inspired me to kind of get out of my comfort zone and just design what I wanted to design. So I mentioned that there was this other secondary passage, and I also mentioned that there's robots that live here. So these robots would basically charge themselves here on this charging base, and they would get their energy from this nuclear fission reactor. And I don't remember the exact details. There's a reason why I designed it this shape. I had done some research on fission reactors and fusion cores. Actually, I don't remember. I think it's fusion reactor, not fission. I think it's a fusion reactor. But the idea would be that this fusion reactor core, this space right here, all it does is that it develops energy. And it sends that energy from here all the way up to this room. And this room basically injects these fuel core cells with energy, and it goes all the way around and distributes it to different parts of the project. And then those parts of the project have their own energy, and they use that energy to charge the robots. And there's different types of robots. So these robots right here, I forgot what I used to call them, but we can call them the worker robots. And I'll show you them now in a bit. They're just like robotic arms on wheels. What they do is they just look for any sort of rubble or materials that they can reuse from the environment. So they'll actually access this core here. They'll go up on that elevator thing that I mentioned, and they will go out and just scavenger for materials that they can be using to help fix the project as it breaks down. And I said scavenger, and that's because rather than them look for it, in this room, there are these things called the Scavengers, which are like drones, and they have a direct connection to the top of the Earth, and they'll fly out through this tube here into Earth, and they will actually just, in the air, scavenger for possible materials or pits of materials that they can then send a signal to the central system, and then that central system will inform these scavenger robots or these worker robots, hey, there's not too far from here a pile of material that you can bring and use it to work on the project. And there was supposed to be a storage area you see here. From here on, like, the idea would be that the robots would come down this core and store those materials in some sort of place. But again, I ran out of time, so I couldn't get into that. And so that's pretty much enough talking about this. I think I covered it all. This right here is a section. It's a weird section. It's like if I cut through here and then here, and then I merge them together. So you can see the inside of this and you can see the inside of that. And it's standing here looking that way. So again, this now is the core. We're going down the core, and you can see that this is that elevator that just floats up to the top and to the bottom. And it's completely wireless. It's just uses technology to float up and down. And every time it lands in like a charger base, we would say. And that's how it gets its energy, and it's able to function. This is, I'll go back and forth. This part right here, okay, where the scavengers are, you could see that they're in their charging bases right now. And once they're ready to go out and look, they go up this, which sends them to the surface of the Earth, and now they can just start flying around and looking for any form of life. They could also find humans, I would think, and bring them back over here. Pretty much, they're just helpful. They're looking for any sort of information to help this project continue. Now we're going to take a look at accessing this space, which is the virtual reality room. or augmented reality room. And so as you walk here, you could see this right here is a fusion core. And the fusion core, they're located in the rooms in separate places. But this is powering all of this here. And so the idea is that you would walk up to one of these platforms, you would put on one of the headsets, and you would look into the room, and now the project is able to communicate with you through those augmented reality goggles. Now we could go down this core right here, and this core will lead you into the fusion core room, and that fusion core room looks like this. So it's a huge room. This core right here leads up where I just showed you in the other image, and you come down here and you can see that all the dead batteries, all the dead cores will come from everywhere throughout the project into here, and then they go around, they're charging, they're being pumped with that energy that's made below, and then they're ready to go back into the project. So it's basically like they're batteries. That's essentially what it is. And you can see a shot of what that looks like. So at the top you have the fusion core room, and then at the bottom you have the fusion reactor. So the fusion reactor is just making the energy and it's sending it up here, and then it's filling up these pods so that those pods can then be used to replace empty pods throughout the project, and then that's basically the energy cycle. And this is inside that fusion core reactor. So it's a huge space. You can't really tell from this image, but it would be huge, just incredibly huge. And here you have another section showing that. So, once more, this is the fusion core room, and then this is the fusion core reactor. And then it sends the information up here, or the energy rather, sends it up here and whatnot. And then I'll get into these right now, which is these are data centers. So these data centers basically, this part was pretty funky, okay? Because the idea here would be that all the data that is being processed by the project is displayed here in this room. And so the project is able to understand what needs to be done on its own. But the reason that there's all these displays, and there's another one here, is because once there's human intervention, a future civilization comes here, then the project could begin to try to explain what's going on. How did this project work? So that the robots could then give this project on to the next human civilization to try to intervene and help and progress this project that's however long old now. And this is one of the last rooms. I have one more, but this is one of the last ones here. Super underdeveloped. And that would go somewhere here. I never got to design it, but maybe somewhere here. Maybe this would have grown further. But the idea would be that this project would also attempt to try to create some sort of natural or artificial biome. So there would be different plants and different animals, and they would have some sort of artificial lights that would help all these things grow. It would be a way that we could help these species of plants and animals to thrive in here, so that if there's complete chaos up on the surface of the earth and all animals and plants begin to die, we can at least house some here. So it's essentially like a time capsule greenhouse zoo type thing. And then finally we get to this space, it's just above where I just showed you. It's just above that zoo that I have downstairs. And this is the artifact room. So you walk in, it looks like something straight out of Tron. And these are those doors that I told you that seal shut to not allow flooding to go to the next phase or the next level. And these, I was supposed to put things inside these tubes for the render, but I didn't have time. So the idea would be that people would walk in here and they can see these different tubes, and there's different layers of these tubes that hold on to different artifacts, and they're preserved in some sort of liquid or with some special light or something. That's why it looks all crazy and all funky. And that's the end of my project. So this is a top view. I remembered calling this on my board a site plan, I think, and my professor was like, man, that can't be a site plan because it's not above the site. It's below the site. So it has to be called something else. He was so, stuck on that idea. He told me that a few times, and it didn't bother me, but I was like, well, what else am I supposed to call it? I don't know. So you're probably wondering how people took this project. Like I said, some people enjoyed it. Some people were really annoyed by it. I feel like most people really enjoyed it, especially the jurors, because think about this. The jurors, they were just looking at ordinary, and I don't mean to say that in a bad way or in a good way. They were just looking at projects that they're used to, a shelter, a house, a mall. And all of a sudden comes me with this crazy stuff. So they were like, okay, you know, you got my attention. Like, it kind of woke them up. Whether they hated it or they loved it, they were at least intrigued in the idea, and they were participating a lot. So this caught all the jurors' attentions. I ended the thesis with a perfect grade. So, you know, it wasn't a bad project. It was, in their eyes, it was a good project. But the most important thing for me is that I really stepped out of my boundaries and really became comfortable with the idea of being creative. So who I am today is really, it really got shaped by this specific project. This specific project right here, it really made me who I am today. And I don't say that lightly. I really mean that. So it's an incomplete project. It's definitely not perfect. It probably doesn't belong in the world. It probably belongs in a book or in a movie. But I had a lot of fun making this. I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to do this, that I landed in that studio and was able to do something so crazy, because I had never done something like that. And for those of you who have gotten to this point in the video, my God, you guys have patience, and you guys are probably super creative yourselves, because to be able to listen to something like this, to listen to me ramble on for however long this is, I think I've been recording for the last 36 minutes, but I'm going to have to severely trim this. But for those of you who have been able to make it a long time, you know, you guys obviously have some sort of weird creative thing going on in your head. So I encourage you guys to experiment with that creativity. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was a weird one, and hopefully for my next videos, I'll be able to show you some of my other work, but that's more realistic and more comfortable to look at. So with that being said, I'll see you guys down in the comments.